Next up, we will move into a dialogue called Can Expert-Led Community Programs and Professional Services Displace Mutual Aid and Community Ownership? Justin, please.
Thank you, Ruby. So it's a mouthful today. Today we have Ms. Ang Bilian, Senior Director. No, you are now Director General of Social Welfare. I noticed that because it used to be Director, then got General. That sounds very military and. I wish I could be Researcher General. Might be like Researcher Corporal.
Don't domain.
Then we have Ms. Lim Kai, Senior Director, CDC Planning and Development Division. She's the reason why we have CDC vouchers. Yesterday, the new yay, 80% use, and she will remind everyone, please use it. Next, we have Ruth Tan, Executive Director of South Central Community FSC. Wow, a lot of fans here. See, well, it's a competition now. See who can get the loudest applause. Ms. Lin Shi, Founder and Executive Director of Three Pumpkins Limited. And Mr. Lim Ting Zhou, Community Worker and Co-Founder of the Kasia Resettlement Team. So the dialogue today is a mouthful, and I'll kind of explain it. I think the question we started with was, to what extent can and should impoverished communities solve their own problems or rely on experts and professionals to intervene? Advocates of an asset-based development approach believe that focusing on the strengths and gifts of communities, instead of focusing on their deficits, for example, is a more powerful way of mobilizing change. When people come together, they can unlock hidden and unappreciated assets that can help determine how best to address the problems as a community. Now, the people who do this work, and there are people here, point out it requires a longer and more intensive mode of engagement to build relationships and support people in their own decisions. Not everyone is comfortable with this approach. For example, funders who have their own accountability pressures and therefore prefer to pay for a clearly defined service delivered within a set time frame by a specialized professional with expertise in the matter. It is difficult to predetermine outcomes or impact because this work depends on what the community comes up with. And so sometimes they don't come up with anything interesting, right? And so this lack of certainty makes some stakeholders uncomfortable. Of course, sometimes they come up with something really wonderful, but then it's hard to bet on that. So others suggest that such informal social support also lack dependability. And in any case, there are limits to what self-help and mutual support can achieve. So Denise shared about the abundant community initiatives, a couple of people coming together, and people have jobs, so we don't spend that much time doing that. It's highly undependable, right? The people who do this work cannot always promise what the solution necessarily looks like, only the process. And when under pressure, even those who believe in it may short-circuit the process. They consult lightly instead of empower. They gather views but do not necessarily allow people to make their own decisions. And there are some who go quite far to the other side. And so at the Baltimore study trip, we were kind of surprised, many of us who believed in the ABCD approach, that they would support, the adults would support the youth, even if they disagreed with the youth. Is community development and professional social service, and that's the question we are considering today, are they fundamentally contradictory to each other, or can they be complementary? If they can be complementary, then under what conditions should we have professional help, and under what conditions or circumstances should we encourage community mutual aid? And is it possible to synergize these efforts, or are the tensions only inevitable? So first, I would like to go down the list and have people do self-introductions. I did introduce you, but did you want to do self-introductions? The Director General say their side, they must start their side.
Okay, yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Okay. Hi, I'm Ruth. So good afternoon. After lunch, hope we can keep you all awake. We're supposed to have an exciting, lively dialogue, right? Okay. So yeah, I'm Ruth. So I'll first start off by introducing myself as a mother of three, a resident living in Marine Parade. And so I lived there for decades, and it's my community. And I'm privileged to work in a space in the South Central community. So that's how I like to be known next, right? A space that I work in. A mother of three, Very happy to live in Marine Parade where there are many elderly and my children can grow alongside and have that diversity and embrace that in the communities. And then a social worker, and then last an ED in SCC, right? So I wanted to introduce in that order because it's how we show up in trying to be congruent in communities and what we say and how we show up. So I think the work in the last 4 years, I think I've been in a very privileged space to work alongside communities, alongside with families, right? And I think the work has been very much a humbling experience. So the work in South Central is really very nicely nestled within the community where there are many rental households as well, families. And I think the work that we try to do or aspire to, taking an ABCD approach, of course, is really hope to unlock as much assets there are in the communities. And there are many of us here, right? So there are, I think, counted 40 tables just now, just observing, just curious, right? So it's like wedding, right? So 40 tables, each of us are a resident in our own right. And you just imagine if today you're a neighbor to someone, the multiplying effect would be, there are 400 of you now, right? So the effect would be 800. That doesn't sound so scary, right? So just a simple act. So I thought I wanted to introduce from how I would show up in a community, and I work with families in South Central Community FSC. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Ka Yi. I hope all of you are still awake. I look after the 5 CDCs, and thank you very much for introducing the CDC vouchers scheme to everybody. So my often first starting question is, have you all claimed your vouchers yet? Or the next question then I will ask you, have you spent all your vouchers? Because it's very, very important for you to do that. Come end of this year, I'm just making a sales pitch, okay? Come end of this year, we are going to take back the money if you don't spend it. Okay, yeah, so next year there will be another batch coming up for you to claim. So remember to spend all and you can claim again next year. So that's my speech. But having so having said that, actually, I think the CDC voucher scheme has been a very good way of bringing a lot of people together. And I want to introduce it this way because we work with 10 government agencies. We work with 11 PA divisions, and I have a full army of CC staff behind me. So it may be a simple digital solution, but actually there's a lot of hidden work behind that nobody really knows except us. So it looks easy, but it's not difficult. So why am I sharing this? It's all part of building community. Which is what I'm trying to share today. And my introduction, I suppose, in a way, is I look after 5 CDCs, and with the 5 CDCs, we do a lot of aggregating of resources, we build capabilities, and also we actually connect communities and partners together. And that's also part of the reason why I'm interested to be here today. And I'm happy to be here today because I thought there are a few things I can learn from you, and also at the same time share with you some of the things that we have done and some ideas that we have come up with that may be useful for you to help transform yourself, help build the capabilities of what you're doing, and also at the same time help you with building communities. So I think that is basically what I like to introduce myself as. I'm also a collective impact and community development practitioner because we have agreed that we are not going to share slides. So I have a deck of slides that I have prepared previously, but because our meeting together, we agreed as a community, we just form a community of partners. We just agreed that we will not be sharing any slides. So what I have done is I've passed the slides to Justin. Okay, on that note, thank you very much.
Hello, hi everyone. Thanks for having me here. My name is Jing Zhou. I'm a community worker. I'm part of 2 community organizations, the Kasia Resettlement Team and Mapati Kaki. We are groups of community organizations who support the journey of rental flat communities, rental housing communities in what we call involuntary relocation, right? So government says that you want the land back, we need to move. The land has other purposes to serve for national interest. So what happens to the people there? That's what my team does. Personally, as a community worker, I see my practice and my work to be focused on community and care. And I think with the issue of relocation, then it intersects on housing, health, and these aspects, right? So community and care and housing and health and poverty. So that's where I come from. I think today's topic is an interesting one to all of us, which is why we are here in this panel. I thought that my starting kind of contribution is to say that the kind of definition and function of community has changed dramatically, I think, over the last 10, 20, 30 years. We are very kind of familiar with localized communities in how we think about it and how we practice community development. But there are a lot more virtual and online communities and other kinds of community spaces that we should also think about and pay attention to. That's my first point. And I think the second kind of suggestion that I have to today's dialogue topic is that I believe that community development is complementary to professional services. But there are times when there will be contradictions. I hope that the conversation we have today explore when are these times where there are contradictions and how we should navigate those contradictions.
Hi everyone, my name is Shi Yun. I run a socially engaged arts organization called Three Pumpkins. So I'm a community artist. I'm also a community worker. So I came into this field or this sector actually as a very curious person. So being artists, we are very curious. I mean, some of my artist friends are here also. For instance, when we come in the room, we are actually more curious about why are different people wearing different colored lanyard. So some wear green, some wear orange, some wear red, how come like that? So we are naturally like very curious people. So my curiosity when I went to the community was about the children living in the rental flats. So we, as socially engaged artists, we are interested in relationships. So what are the relationships these kids have with themselves, with their families, with the school, with social service, with the systems? So I started this work 5, 6 years ago. And then this curiosity led me into deeper and deeper hole. Like this week alone, I have to meet with MOHT, MSF, MCCY. So I don't know why I'm in this space also, how the work has led, and what is community work. So I think also, adding on to what Jingzhou has said, I think I want to share a bit about what I discovered as my work as a community worker. So I had to write it down because, this is very experimental work. And I'm always wondering what is my work and what is my team's work. So this might take a little bit of time, sorry. So 50% of my work is to be available to the community. So we are in Boon Lay. I run a center called Tatakut Kids Club, means not afraid, children's club. So it's like a community club, the kids can just come in. So 5 days a week, we are available to the community. So what do? We hold community spaces. We're a community art studio, community kitchen, community garden. We also play with them in the playground. So these spaces, we hold these spaces and to build a sense of belonging and a sense of identity or community. In this work, we are also very much about being available for people to speak with. So for example, what does it mean? It means that we are going to be there at 3 to 5 o'clock. Some of the kids might come in and say, hey, I got a CDC voucher. $100 or $200, $100, right? $100. Then we talk to, okay, your family got this, so how are you going to spend the money? So that's about decision making. They might come in and then tell us that, I work at this fast food restaurant. And then you ask, okay, then how is it like? Then you discover that, you are actually at a 14-year-old, you are working 40 hours a week. Are you actually being exploited? Then we also run through this thing with the kids. You also have a family who comes in and say that, I want to celebrate my daughter's birthday, but my mother just passed away. I can't do it. Can we do it together? Then we support that. We also hold that space in order for people to contribute. So you have residents who want to help another resident. You just need a little bit of encouragement. So they come to us and say, I noticed that family, blah, 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 blah. And we say, hey, we'll do something together. Just a bit of encouragement. So a space for people to contribute. And then a space for people to cry too. So nowadays, we run the center for 3 years. I realized that when I go to the ground, I always have to carry a packet of tissue paper because people will just come here and then they will just cry. Okay, so that's like main work. Then after that, we will do some programming, responding to whatever we find in this core work. So this programming is like building a sense of community life. So it's a sense of time. So for example, we have this thing like every Friday, everybody come in, we set up our center to become like a getai. So anybody, you want to perform something, you just come and perform. A sense of time, so that builds community. Then we also do, because we are also arts-based, then we can highlight some issues that community face. The last 20% of my work is a new work. It's becoming like 50 or 60% because of, actually the first 80% is not quite funded. Community worker, usually they will say cannot fund manpower. But now we are funded by ministry, MCCY comes in. So our work also is like, we have this relationship with the kids, with the people. Then how do we work with Comlink to build this integrated community support? Now, we also look at how do we work with MOHT to promote some sort of better food choices among the kids. So then later, then I have another 50% of my work, which is doing all the admin stuff, another 50%, which is answering questions like, how do you replicate? How do you sustain? So I think we're like 200%. I think everybody's here is the same, 200%, 300% of the work. Okay, that's my life, as a community worker. I thought it's important to share this so that we can answer. I mean, we sometimes don't really know what community-led or community program is. So I thought this will be a foundation. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for all that sharing. And I'm very, very encouraged and I'm very excited. For me, today is a day of celebration. I'll explain to you why. And Carol will attest to that. Carol Soon, IPS. I was just sharing with Carol that I don't know how long, 2014, then 2017, the book came out. But basically, there was a similar kind of a conference like this one, convened by IPS as well. Okay, I think I see some other generation people, they also attended that one, so not so bad. But many of you, maybe this is your first non-profit sort of conference by IPS, but IPS did one during that part. I think it's useful for me. So maybe I'll share with you first. I speak more maybe as an observer of the non-profit space in Singapore. So if we compare with that first conference, that conference was really about speaking up and trying to broker some of the tensions, some of the angst and all that stuff. It's very exciting. Some of you should read that book. So it was necessary and it's a developmental phase. And remember, that's way, way before COVID happens. So what has changed since then? So it was a discussion to raise awareness to me at that point in time. So lots of vibrancy, tensions and stuff like that. Today, what we see here is a very different experience. And, well, we can see that we're matured, we've become more sophisticated. But I often also think I like to thank COVID and the pandemic because it shifted really a lot of things for us, a lot of stuff which we talked about in the past, which we thought could happen but didn't happen. It needed that initiative from the pandemic. So a lot of things have changed. I see a sprouting, it's like spring, all the flowers are blooming. And this room is really a testament of that. And your story is amazing. And I also want to give credit to Soft N+1, something like that. Yeah, because when I was speaking to Kenneth, who started it, I tell you, I was so encouraged by the journey he had. A very long journey. Sometimes we just see the nice part, but it was a long journey. Prema, all that will tell you all the stories about how people have journeyed. So I want to give credit to all the people who have built those pathways to where we are today. And we'll probably spend 2 days to hear all the stories from the people in this room. So to me, there's breadth, there's diversity, there's depth of knowledge and expertise, from that growth. And I think we need to acknowledge that this is uniquely Singapore. And I think we need to be proud that, we have something to offer the world about our own journey in community development and community work. So that's I'll run through very quickly. I promise you I won't use that all the time. So the non-profit large group diversity is very interesting. We have included co-ops. Co-ops have been in existence in Singapore for decades, but we never saw it as really also something that's so important in non-profit sector and so on. I think it's useful for us to bear in mind when we talk about comwork and all that stuff, profile of participants. Today, Singaporeans live much longer. We have generations in the community. We need to think about how to also help the generations to actually work across. And generations bring perspectives. Something that, I was just sharing this little story just now. For young people, we need to excite them. And it is about anything that is Instagrammable, right? And it's okay. But how do we also help them to grow in terms of the governance concepts and stuff like that? So there's a lot more that we can do because of this vibrancy. Thirdly, this thing about roles. I think MCCY, MSF, IPS, Tote Board, all these, okay, are institutions, but institutions can convene things like that. I think it's a bit more difficult for some of you to do this kind of convening. So there is a role for some of these institutions, and we must continue to play that role. So to me, it's about being clear about roles, and then we can really work much more productively. So it's not about you, me, I. So I told Justin deliberately I've worn orange because to me, it's not about red and green. Yeah, orange is the space. All right. So going forward, what is it that we want to do? We want to be able to tackle this because we have gone into phase 2, ground initiatives, lots of it. The next phase is even more challenging. We really need to tackle the complex problems. What are the complex problems? Climate change, stuff like that. Because they span across boundaries. Okay, we can say all we want. I heard this little story from someone who gave credit to Vincent. There's a Vincent in the room who is trying to convene a cooperative of sorts. And I think it's a little bit stuck, is it? Everybody said, good, he's not there. He said, so you must be the Vincent. No, I want to acknowledge all the wonderful people in this room. And then everybody said, do good, right? But I think his biggest problem now is everybody say good, but we cannot all agree on good, no. So we all like to talk good, But when the reality comes, our goodness vary. So there's lots of these conversations going on. Okay, I don't want to, one more. 15 seconds only. I think came out a bit from Brema as well. I was quite glad you mentioned about it, about people being helped. What's the language? How do we approach people? The dignity of people. How do we respect each other? How do we respect each other's work? Respect people and all that stuff. Then also the contributors. And then this whole thing, I had to describe like that first because if I say the word, then people don't like. Brema also say, yeah, you talk governance, people don't like. But there is a space to talk about ethics and governance. All right, so I think I want to put some of these things on the table because I think the next, don't talk about the past lah. Then, okay, let me clarify one thing. Cannot say like that about the SSO lah. Now, this apply ComCare quite easy, no. Cannot a lot of paperwork, nonsense. By the way, we are now experimenting. The next step is this one. You can apply for your clients using mobile app also. Okay, so give my colleagues a chance. Don't always say those kind of things lah. But you know why we have to be a bit maybe slower? Because, we cannot make even 0.5% mistake one leh. Because all of you 300 in this room will complain. So give us time, but we are progressing. So encourage my colleagues as well at the ground. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bilian. I would like to start with actually the theme, right? For each of you to weigh in on the issue. To what extent should impoverished communities solve their own problems or rely on experts? And maybe you could cite an example where you think one case professionals really are needed, and for some cases, the professionals should step aside because community can do it. Should we go from that side then?
Okay, so the question is, should impoverished communities solve their own problems and examples, right? Let's start with one that maybe someone actually does seek help, right? I think we start with where they're at first. So if a family comes in, we work at a family service center, so just use that as a context. So they come into FSC, they say, I need help, I have bills, I need pay, I have issues. So we start with where they're at, and we can't say, I'm sorry, you should solve things by yourself because, 2 4 with by, you should do it by yourself, good luck, right? So then we realize, no, because they may not have the capacity discovered, they may not have the resources to navigate. So I think in those instances, we acknowledge that sometimes we need to do things for them. But the consciousness to move them from a for relationship to a with, okay? And then hopefully over time we can build and discover assets, right? They don't only show up to be receivers. People who receive can give. So I think as long as we hold those mindsets, we naturally will be able to see beyond that. So I think, so there are instances where, yes, we do get families who come and ask for help. And I think those instances is really where the professional comes in, right? And try to leverage on. Of course, communities, if you ask me, actually, it's already present. It's something that you don't need to do more of. Okay, so I think one of the dangers is, as what William is saying, right? We try to strive to do better. We want to do more. We want to be more productive. And it's somehow very inherent in our very gung-ho Singaporean can-do spirit. Sometimes do more may not necessarily be the best. And I think sometimes, so as professionals, if you ask me, can they solve their own problems? Yes. I think first we need to do two things. First, I think we need to hold our power and privileges in place. So we cannot deny and say, I'm sorry, I don't win FSC, just pretend I'm a worker, right? And pretend now I'm also a resident, right? When I'm not. So I always tell people first, when you hold your power and privileges in place, it's not your community. And so you have to own up and says, this is not my community. I work in this community. People there live in their communities and it's their communities. So I think first is holding power and privileges in place. And then the mindfulness of our roles, right? Whether we are a community worker, social worker, whether we co-create policies. I think we all come here with good intent. So I don't think it's about either or neither nor. I just think it's how we show up to make sure that we acknowledge that we do hold privilege in place, but how you use those privileges in your space and to give people and hold spaces for communities intentionally. And when I always tell people, we must know. So sometimes I talk to my colleagues, right, alongside, we say, we must know when we need to back off. Because when we back off is where people can come in, okay? So COVID was a good example, Billian, you mentioned, right? Because when COVID hits and suddenly all the ground initiatives come out, I was so touched. Right? I remember this story of a light bulb that a community worker told me. It says, because now people cannot go out during circuit breaker. And so people couldn't fix light bulbs. And people were lending light bulbs. So there were those light bulb moments, right? That, people will come to your house and say, okay, you don't have, right? Uncle, I will come. I still have a spare light bulb. I'll come into your house and I'll fix a light bulb for you. You see, otherwise it will be, let me call this number, excuse me, can you please come fix my light bulb, okay? Can you get a volunteer maybe to come and arrange 1 month later to fix my light bulb? So we cannot undermine the importance of people's natural instincts to help. So sometimes I say you must hold your horses, okay? So that's the first point. The second point is also, I think we need to intentionally reduce our professional involvement where possible and elevate communities. So that means where possible, I use communities whose voices are not heard. So I use an analogy, right? I like to use them as diamonds in the rough, right? Everybody loves diamonds. Okay, most women love diamonds, right? Because it's shiny, it's valuable, right? And nobody pretty much likes a rock, right? But diamonds come from rocks. So I see assets and communities like diamonds in the rough, where if you can see its value, and you work it well, I think they are really transformed. So I think that's where I believe that impoverished communities can solve their problems. They will require different actions along the way. So sometimes, so it's not about delivering more. I think it's about discovering more, right? So my first point is holding power and privilege in place. The second one is also really reducing. It's a bit like a hydraulic, right? Where you reduce something and then you increase something more. It's a bit like parenting, right? When you try to be more control, your child will come a life stage where they want to have their own identity. And I think communities also have life stages. So that's second. So discover more rather than deliver more. And I think the last thing that I find it's helpful to navigate, because it's solutions, right? That help us one another. So working in communities, we're very concrete, because we don't like to eat air. Okay, so being more grounded, right? we always ask these 3 questions that I find is really helpful. So I mean, I'm just trying to offer some concrete solutions here, right? I always ask these questions: what can communities do by themselves that they don't need us to do with? And that should be the first question. So when you work with members in communities or in whatever spaces, if communities show up and say, I don't need you to teach me how to teach my kids, not being financially sufficient does not mean that I can't provide for my family. It doesn't mean that I'm lesser as a parent. It just means that financially I may not be sufficient, but I can show up in those spaces well. So first question, what can communities do by themselves that, we don't need to be around and we can, keep our resources? Second is, what can we do together? And it's the ask from them. If they do say, actually we acknowledge we don't have these resources, we need those resources, and can you come alongside us? Then the ask is for you, right? It's like a request and you have to offer, right? And the last is, what are really things that they can't do for now? And they do need you to come into those spaces to help them. So I found those 3-lane questions very helpful for workers to navigate. So I thought I'll just hold there. Yeah.
Thank you, Ruth. I was wondering if it sounds like it's basically if you need to do it for the community, you would do it first, and over time, very intentionally see what they can take on their own. And I wonder, Kai, whether that's your experience in the CDC that you would do and then divest or not.
Okay, I have a slightly different perspective, if you can indulge me in this. Singapore has a very vibrant charity sector. I don't know how many of you have actually looked at the charity unit's annual report. There are over 2,300 registered charities. And even during COVID period, there are still charities being formed, registered charities. And do you know that the annual donation in FY 2019, because they haven't come up with the FY 2020 yet, it's about $3.25 billion. $3.25 billion. And that's how much we're talking about. Very, very vibrant. And do you know that there are 202 of them who are large charities with an annual receipts of over 10 million. But a large proportion of the registered charities are comparatively smaller, and the receipt is comparatively less in terms of annual receipts, very, very little money that they receive. But the reason why I'm sharing this is this effect is actually not uncommon. In the UK itself, there are over 164,000 charities as well, but of which I think it's about 75% have an annual income of less than £100,000. In Australia, there are over 56,000 charities, and only 2/3 of them actually have an annual income of about $250,000 Australian money. The reason why I'm sharing this is because there's this fragmentation of social change effects. And this may be due to short-term and project-based types of funding. I go back to money, yeah? And the increasing demand for such action by a single organization or even project. So why am I saying all this? There's a reason I'm coming to it. So even in the smallest communities, there may be many efforts with similar objectives, with similar partners, with similar funders, especially in Singapore. We have many small communities as well, even if it's impoverished. We do have that. But I think the question then I want to ask is, before we even start solving the problem, do we sit down together and discuss what are the work that overlaps? Do we actually question ourselves? The reason why we are talking about this and there's a lot of money out there is because there are resources out there. So whether programs are led by professionals or by community themselves, I think the challenge is not solely about resources or expertise. I think the challenge is really about how we organize ourselves, about alignment, and also about how can we effectively use the resources that are available in the community. I think that to me is one of the key questions that I would like to pose. Thanks.
Thanks, Kai. Do you think so?
Yeah, I think to start off, it's obvious from this morning's session that no one recognizes ourselves as experts anymore. Everyone disavows from being an expert now.
Except me, I'm very expert.
Except for Justin, that's why he can be the convener. But I think what's clear is that we all think that we all come from different experiences, right? Whether you're a practitioner, community member, policymaker, so on and so forth. So we all focus on what our experiences are and try to contribute there and kind of distance. So that's, I think, a good turn, a good alignment. I think what Ruth was sharing about the identity of the practitioner or the worker is an interesting one to me, because this entire distinction that this question presupposes, right, is that the practitioner or the professional is not part of the community. There's a distinction, there's a distance and boundary that is being drawn there. But my question that I invite us to consider is, why not? Why can't and why shouldn't the professional or practitioner be considered as part of the community, especially when that person is spending probably most of their time, right? We're talking about 5 days a week, 8 to 5, 8 to 6, or even longer hours there. And we might not even spend as much time at home ourselves, right? So, and in my experience as a community worker, I have all sorts of labels and identities, right? I go from being the boy to being someone's godson, to being someone's grandson, to being the friend, to being the caregiver, to being the next of kin, to, the entire range of identities exists. And of course, at different scenarios and in different pieces of work that we do in the community, we put on different hats and different identities. And I think that blurring and that having multiple identities then draw a new invitation for us to ponder whether the professionals can and should be part of the community. And if we regard it that way, then might we work on a different set of questions to address rather than the current set of questions that we have now. Back to the original question, nonetheless, I think I find a bit of discomfort answering that question because I don't know. And I don't know because I think the other people who should be in that conversation to answer that question are not here today, and by which I think we refer to our community members. And each community is different, have different needs, different demographics, different challenges and different aspirations. So everyone might come to a different answer as to how much should be led or supported by experts and professionals and how much otherwise. So I think that this is where I align with what Ruth was talking about, holding our power and privilege. Right? Keeping it in check, I think, means that I profess to not having any answers to that question and that we should decide together. And the question that then arrives for me is, how can we then do that? How can we hold that space? How can we think of processes to do that together so that we can imagine better ways of doing things in the community? And also how to navigate this in a way that I think is cognizant about what are the norms that have been set, right? So some of the norms that we have been living with might suggest to us that this piece of work belongs to this particular stakeholder, and that piece belongs to another one. But how do we navigate that open process while also recognizing that these norms exist, but maybe needs to be questioned or altered? And with that, I think I end my sharing with that final point on the question to me is really, how can we as a society support communities to solve their own issues and challenges? And by that, I think I refer to how can we support each other with resources not just in grants and money, but I think one of the most underestimated resources, as Srin alluded to, is time and presence. You can have a lot of funding and a lot of money, but at the end of the day, you need the people to do the work. You need the people who have that bandwidth, that mind space and that heart space to be present with people. And that is very incredibly challenging, I feel. When I speak to community members and they share that they wish to do their part also, right? They want to volunteer too, they want to do this, they want to do that. But the reality is that to put food on the table or to be able to afford to buy my HDB flat, I need to hold 2 jobs. And if I need to hold 2 jobs, I don't have time to do these things. So that's another frame I kind of want to approach it, whether is it from community member or even as a young person, even as a young adult. I reflected the other day that today a young Singaporean, is expected to excel in your education and work. you must contribute economically, you must be productive, got economic value. And at the same time, you have to care for what I think of as 3 groups of living beings. You have to care for your family, which is your parents. If not, maintenance or parent X also exists. And you also have to care for your children, and you're encouraged to have children. So you got to care for family. And now everyone is saying volunteer, volunteer, from government to schools, to businesses. Everyone is saying volunteer. You must care for your community, care for each other. So we have to take care of our community too. And then we also have to take care of our environment, because the environmental crisis is there. So many things to care about, so many things to do, 200, 300% at work already. Then where do we go from there? So I think if we really want to think about, and we're invested in having communities and civic action, support each other, mutual care, mutual aid, these things are not going to happen, I think, unless we seriously reimagine what the pie of work, pie of living in Singapore looks like between all the different priorities. I hope no one would disagree with me that this is beyond an individual's time management skill, right? So it's not about time management, it's about there are too many things to do, and it's a changing time and a changing reality. So where do we go from that? And if we can, I think, address some of these points, then we have some answers to respond to what we worry about every day on the mental health crisis that we see, the burnout and the dropout rate and retention of people doing this work. And then we have better space and better energy and better time, resources to be able to do what this conference proposes for communities to do their own part in meeting their own challenges and needs and aspirations.
Thank you. I was curious, maybe if there was a social care or community development kind of cooperative that packs your livelihood into the work, because this work is underappreciated and they have no market value, right? Well, do you think that will change anything?
Yeah. Well, I don't know. We should try. That's one easy answer. But then I hand over to Shane for the more difficult question.
To Shane.
I'm trying now. So I am trying to put a team of 8 to serve the community. And I think by community for us is we are very focused on kids who are 7 to 14 in Boon Lay. What does it mean by having full-time community workers? And then what do we do? So community development to me, I think, let's say we have a garden metaphor. So we know that, and I see it as a garden because we are kind of like, we are gardeners. I mean, we are seeing this garden, the plants are not growing so well, and we want the plants to grow well. So we want to do something. Otherwise, we say, yeah, just let it grow well. Right? We don't want to have a relationship with this garden. So what I'm saying is that community programs, right, and when especially when like funders fund program, you are looking at either a pest control or fertilizer. So, okay, there's a problem, there's a pest, let's bring in some sort of pest control. That means like, okay, these people, maybe not very good with their finances, not very good with their social emotional learning. Let's put some workshop, let's put some program for these kids. Fertilizer it's a similar thing. So let's say they don't have this thing, let's plant in this thing. So we have this program coming in and out. What I think we really don't have are the gardeners that attend to the garden every day. So you go there and you look at why is the soil not good? That means that this environment, what is missing in this environment for the plants to grow? Then people who really study the air, I mean this metaphorically, why are the pests coming? What is the history of the soil? Why is it not working for the people? And this gardener is there every day with the people to understand what's the situation. So going back to the role of a community worker, and of course, and then I think it's addressing to what extent we should do. So for me, because I come from a space of the arts and we tend to push boundaries, so actually I live in Boon Lay also. So I was actually in 3 communities. I was in Tua Payoh, Lengkok Bahru, and Boon Lay. So I have to choose a place for me to build TTKC. And I decided, I'm the Boon Lay resident, right? Probably nobody will do that, like build that thing in your own community. So I just try. So the first time I got to know my advisor, Minister Desmond Lim, actually I approached him as a resident. Then he knew that I was doing this thing. So I'm just pushing some sort of boundaries in terms of relationship. In the community, very embarrassingly, when I walk around, they will call me Teacher Lin. The kids, the families, they will call me Teacher Lin. So my question, I played a role because they assigned me that role. I didn't tell anybody I'm Teacher Lin. So then my question is, why does the community need a teacher in the community? What do they expect of me as a teacher in the community? So that drives me to do my work. Because it seems like this role is needed. That's why they call me that. I didn't assign myself that role. So I kind of experiment along the way like that. So I want to go back to something about relational work and relational intelligence. So we talk about impoverished community, and I have a bit of an issue with that word because I don't really know how to define that word. But basically, we say that, for me, it's like we deal with the kids from a rental flat. From my interaction with them, most of them in the families have history of very complex or broken relationship. So when they relate to others, that means in like solving conflicts, learning how to communicate, learning how to build trust, learning how to create boundaries. These are very important skills and values that may not be present in the family. So as community workers, actually, we are also cultural workers. So when we are very present in the community, when we talk to the youths, and by extension, because we care for the youth and the children, the family will come to us. Because some Jingzhou did tell me before, every family loves the person who loves their children. So from the children, we also get to know the family. So then we are also creating a culture of communication. How do you talk about a problem with more clarity, without so much impulse? Because these communities usually, because of the stresses in life, right, is always emotional, impulsive. Very quickly, they go into shouting. But how do you introduce a different language of talking, of dialogue? So when we think about community worker, I think we also need to think that we're doing cultural work. So when we have that community of kids who come together very often, they're exposed to different language. They're exposed to different ways of looking at a problem. They're exposed to different ways of looking at boundaries between person to person. They're exposed to, I have a different way of looking at yourself, and that you're accepted. Basically, you are building a culture of very positive social connections. So I would think that my input for this is to look at community work also as cultural work. Thank you.
Thanks, Yun. Do you, Billian?
A few comments. So listening to again the stories and all the articulations, I have a few very simple way of really reminding myself about a couple of things. So one is actually sometimes the 80-20. So there are 20% of some things that I think we really want the expert to be there. And also not only just to be experts, to be really good experts and also be current and all that. It's not directly relevant, maybe the community work, but it's this whole idea that someone just reminded me, my colleague, hey, when it comes to medical stuff, please you really want that damn good doctor. So I think there is a space for building expertise and for people to really aspire to really do good. I think we mustn't forget about that bit. But other than that, there's 80% of a lot of things that really the community and anybody can take that space. Then for those spaces, how do I usually apply in terms of principles? I usually use very simple ways of thinking. It's three things: ready, willing, able. I think sometimes people are ready. If sometimes we see a lot of excitement, then willing also, put out hand and all that. But I think we also need to take cognizance about ability. And then when it's ability, how do we actually then build that part and support them? And a good example is what Prema shared in the morning about, the work with the caregivers. They really we sussed them and they were ready, they were willing, right? But they needed certain abilities which they haven't got yet. Then you quietly support them at the back, and then how to actually even set them up as a SSA, and they're really flying now. Really amazing work in a very compressed time. Used to be able to help SSAs to actually be formed over a longer period of time. Today, really, we can fast forward a lot of things. So to me, I always use ready, willing, able as a concept. The other one that is very age-old, from eons and decades, this thing about doing things to a community. Some communities are not yet in that state yet to fly. How do you actually be there? And really, it's like post-tsunami, you really have to do certain things. So it's the two, and then you move on to the with the community, right? Then after that, it's doing things for the community, and after that, with the community. Then after that is what Ruth has mentioned. When do you know when to actually receive and really give that space to them? I've got another very simple principle that I often also share. How do we sometimes get out of people's way? Sometimes the best thing we can ever do is get out of people's way, And we need to be aware about it and also to appreciate that. And just to give a bit of context, these young people here, I always need to remind people, because in the past, we were planning, I think Gerard will be able to share with you. I mean, some of the committees or whatever in the past, they were planning really for longevity for Singaporeans up to 65, 68, touch and go. Yeah, but today really no. And with the very, very young people in the room, I always tell them, you will have to plan for 100 years. So slowly, don't make all this pressure on yourself. Right?
Yes, correct.
Yeah, no need. Spread out all that pressure on you over a 30-year time frame. Because you're not sure, no. Yeah, well-being will be affected. So pace yourself. So, it's time to really look after your children. Go. And be blessed and be happy doing it and do it wholeheartedly and don't feel guilty, even though, the loudspeaker says certain things. It's not for you. So you must learn to be able to do selective listening also. Then you can last for 100 years. Okay, so it's about pacing, and I think we need to help younger people to think about that, because really they do feel it. They feel it a lot from here. My God, 30 messages for you every day is jialat. So we need to help people to pace with that. And then this very quick point about the overlap. I've always been very intrigued by this, but over many, many times, and actually when I found for myself, when you go down and you map it out, there isn't a lot of overlap. You know why? Because there's so many needs at the ground. And Singapore is very compact. How many million people? 6 million or 5+. So, there is more than enough space for people to do. So don't worry about that. I wouldn't worry too much about too much overlap. I worry about people's needs not being met. So I would bring that conversation even deeper to the ground in terms of that. Thank you.
Thanks, Billian. The next thing I want to share is, and before I open it up to everyone to ask questions, you can already do that, is this kind of a thought experiment. Every time I share this thought experiment and illustration, I will get two very different views. Some will say, wow, I love it, let's do it. And the other side say, what, are you crazy? So the context of that idea is that a lot of the money that goes into the non-profit sector goes into organizations and professionals, right? So you pay, you want social workers to be paid well, and the social workers would deliver some program. And then the client actually don't get any money, but they actually want the money. And so one of the kind of the counterpoints to this paradigm is direct giving. There's actually an organization called Direct Giving. We believe just give directly. So what if we took a program that was difficult, it's so complex, it's wrapped around care, and it's expensive because we have a team of different specialized experts, whether it's drug rehab and a social worker, et cetera, to deliver this very expensive, customized, intensive work to this client. So I said, how comfortable would you be if we said, let this person decide. If he can hit all the outcomes you want, he get a job, he stay clean, check his urine, whatever. After 1 year, he stay clean, your program will cost you $25,000. Give $25,000 to this person. So the spectrum is, are you crazy? And wow, I love it. And I wanted to hear from this spectrum what you think of that. Ruth?
That's a very tempting suggestion. Okay, so I don't think it should be either or, neither nor. I think there's always a space where we can come to a common ground where there are differentiated roles. So I guess first would be, is this what families want, or is this what we want for them, right? So do we agree that family investments are best for them, or do they feel this is what we want? So if families do want to commit to it, it's not a bad idea, I just want to say, right, of getting direct transfers. The question is, do they have the capacities and an alongside to help them discover the capacities that's needed for that 1 year? Or for that 2 years, right? I mean, some of you have your own like investors or like your own financial consults that you go to and ask, right? And say, this is what I have, this is all I have. Can you help me not to overdo this, right? So I think it might help to have a little bit of a hybrid, right? That if families feel this is what I want, this is what my dreams for my family is this. And, I want to, for example, invest in a house, I want to get something else, okay, that's fine. And who do you think along those journeys might be able to help you, right? And they decide, rather than we decide, say, oh, sorry, you must go to, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, because they are specialists, right? The specialist is only if they feel it's a specialist, okay? So it's not medical, right? And some people say, I don't believe in, most of us believe in good medical health. And some people say, well, good health starts from what I eat every day, what I do every day, and how I show up every day. And some people go for alternative medicine, example. So it really depends on what the family wants. Then the roles of where professionals will sit has to be very clearly curated, but by families who know how you want us to show up. Then in that journey, the role of an alongsider, which is where we come along, will help them to see if they are moving along with the expectations they do move 5 steps forward, 10 steps back. Okay, and they're no different from all of us, by the way, all our families. You think about it, right? Nobody's families is like, a breeze, right? We all have children, we struggle for a few years, and then we slow down in our careers, we work less, we earn less, we have more responsibilities, and then we move on later in life when our kids grow up, we have more capacities. So I think as long as we have that common understanding, I don't think it's a bad idea to try experiment a family investment approach. And I think that maybe the difference is also we talk about Baltimore, right, being a very commonly referred to. I hear Baltimore more than Singapore, right? And that's okay, right? And in fact, the learning is so precious, right? It's actually a reminder that if you think about Singapore in its early days, right? People last time called Orang Laut, right? I don't know whether you all know this saying, right? Orang Laut is where even before Sang Nila Utama landed on our waters, right? Most of our people were actually indigenous people, right? And they're seamen people. And they didn't need social services, right? I mean, they all have to fish because someone's got to fish. Someone's got to eat, somebody's got to cook and bring, and we'll figure out something together, right? So maybe that approach back to our roots may give some approach on how to do it mindfully that may determine the success of that investment. Because very often it becomes it's not what you think of the concept, it's when the rubber hits the road. Then you realize, outcomes, measure the output, 25,000 investment, and then you tell me like that only, So there's all these great expectations when you do a grand experiment. That's how I see. So I guess it's the threshold of that grand experiment, and we probably need to co-design with families what those indicators of success for them means, right? To them, it's such a grand language, right? It's basically, how do you know your families are better than before? How do you know that your children is really achieving what you are hoping that they can best achieve to their best potential? So I think those questions will be important. It's a little bit of a long way around that thought process. And it's associational life getting deeper, our family quality of life getting better, right? Because Jinzhou say, right, very soon, he's so scared, right? If he get married now, you have to worry about children. So maybe don't marry, have a pet. Then after that, he worries, a pet also very, very, expensive. Okay, so I guess maybe along those lines, as I deepen your ideation, it's not a bad idea. It's a nice experiment, but with families involved in that process, and how they shape that process before it takes off. And of course, if you talk about scalability, that's a whole new terrain, I would say.
Kari, would the CDC ever do something crazy like that?
We do direct funding sometimes too. Yeah, I give you the example of COVID Relief Fund. We have Gong Ming San and we have Nian Gong Si, who actually donated to us $2 million each. And then we match it with another $2 million. And so what happened was we actually give direct funding to the beneficiary who lost their job or who has partial loss of income. I think we need to be, I suppose, clear what is it that we want to, what problem we want to solve. We have simple problems that require us to solve it immediately. And so you have interim ComCare, you have CDC types of schemes to help relieve immediately. I have CDC relief, emergency relief fund as well. Like for instance, if there is a fire and this household lost all their, this family lost all their belongings, you know, you can go and apply for it, and we will quickly, without question, give you some money. But I think the issue I thought about is really what is the problem we want to solve. If it is a simple problem and it's money, then certainly I think we can help you elevate that. And if it is a short-term problem or mid-term problem that, you know, at this point in time you have money shortage, financial issues, we can come in. But if you talk about complex problems, if you talk about social mobility, then we need to think about how do we help the families to do wraparound care? How do we actually help them to improve their upward mobility? How do we help their kids in terms of education? So an example that I have actually just sunset the integrated care program, which I've been running for 9 years. It's a social mobility program, which I have been working with about 23 partners. This program is really very painful, but I really want to thank Topbot for the sponsoring, or for being so progressive in terms of the way they sponsored this social mobility program. And we managed to actually help about 650 kids along the 9 years to pass their PSLE and to progress to secondary school. So thanks to Topbot for that. They look at it from the perspective of sponsoring as a project, as a complex program, rather than just individual person or individual organization coming in. So I think, and we don't give money to the families. We actually get services and we try to do wraparound care. So I managed also to get E2I to come in to have dedicated career coach to coach this group of vulnerable family caregivers and parents in terms of job, because we realized that they couldn't hold a job. Even if we do a job placement for them, after half a year, there is a tendency for them to also fall off. So therefore, there is a dedicated career coach, specialized one. And then we bring in Singapore Business Federation Foundation and Singapore Business Federation to come in to actually socialize the employers. We also work with the foundation to sponsor the career coaches to do specifically this kind of work, and to handhold and to work with the social worker to do visits at the families. So I think if long and short of it, and I don't want to monopolize this, long and short of it is that if you want to give money, you can. But on the other hand, whether that's the kind of money that will be effective for the family and you help the family to fish, or you just give the fish to the family, I think that is something that we need to decide. And it's not easy because social mobility work is really not easy. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I think Justin drew up a nice trap that I'm going to gently refuse to walk into, because I call it a trap because I think that the question is, I think, premised on a certain paradigm that we need to answer the question, because when we answer the question, then we find the right model, then we can prototype the right model, then we can scale the right model, and we can do the right thing. But is that the case to, is that the right paradigm, I think, to approach problem that is as complex as what we are discussing today? I think perhaps not. And my response to it would rather be to say that I think what I hope to see would be a diversity of practice. A diversity of practice and a diversity of models that would mean that both of what you are suggesting can coexist, and that we can see both of them exist and then decide whether is it community members or professionals or practitioners decide what makes the best sense or what space should each occupy, right? Is it 80-20? Is it another kind of ratio? And I think there is broad and I think sufficient recognition that no one solution works for everyone, for every community or for every issue. We certainly should learn from each model, whether is it the direct giving model or the program services kind of model. Each has its own offers and gifts, but it doesn't, I think, by itself propose to be the one and all solution. Right, so I think what I hold on to is the idea of having the diversity of practice, and I think that is the real kind of threat that I sometimes feel that we are at right now, right? When we are talking about, I think, the topic of community development today, and also the urgency to do something about poverty, widening inequality, and reducing social mobility, is that as we try to converge and we try to urgently tackle some of these important issues that I think we're all committed and dedicated to, we then kind of narrow our horizons to think there is maybe one or two right answers or model, and that needs to be then done nationwide, and that is probably the solution. I think that the things that are what I think of as hard services and programs that needs to be run nationwide are already there. We already start from that very good foundation. So the next step for me is to then think, what is the kind of diversity of different practices and models? Shirin's work in Boon Lay is one, and many other friends in the sector here offer different models. Bilen talked about a good space, the cooperative model led by Vincent. We have other arts drama practitioner or drama box friends who do community theatre, participatory theatre. And these are all different models and practices that are all what I regard as important, invaluable, indispensable parts of community development. So that's my take, I think. I rounded up to say that there is perhaps no one right answer that I see, and what I hope to see is a diversity of practice.
Thanks, Jinjo.
I think my question to the question is, who is asking for it?
I'm asking,
Oh,
personally
you're asking.
curious.
Oh, you are curious. I mean, we are offering money direct to the family. So you are asking, or not the
I'm
family?
asking if somebody suggested this to you, right? Or suggested it to, let's say, even a community worker or FSE. Social worker is so expensive. I'd rather directly give, so it bypasses your paycheck into the community itself. Would you make peace with that? Or would you say, no, I'm needed. I know I'm doing this 200% work and you don't know my value. It is perfectly legitimate that I bring value to this community. Or, yes, I think the community should help themselves and pay for success based on what they decide to help themselves. And I'll step very, very far away to the extent that I don't even take any resources from you.
I think this offer is based on the assumption that the family needs that direct assistance. Yeah. I think there is also a work on the ground to ask the family what they really want. So, for example, in my work, I don't offer money. We just offer a lot of people to spend time and play with the community. And then we do explore with the community, like, okay, what if we just don't have this space? And the children and the families would say that, no, we need to have TTKC. Then we ask the community, what is it that you need, you like about this space? So the answer is always, we like to have someone to talk to. So I think there are many different needs. So we need to also ask the community, actually, what do they really need? So this direct offer of, money is a very, direct thing. This is what everybody needs. But I think before that, I think we need to ask the community what do they need. And a lot of time, the community would surprise us that they actually want to contribute. So basically, we come from a very poor model. Our spaces, our floor are always broken and all that. So they will ask us, hey, actually, how much money you need? And they will, as we are talking now, the kids at TTKC, they are actually making things for our fundraiser. Because what they need is this space where they can come together and someone listen to them, not money. Yeah, and families are also chipping in. So we need to ask them, I think, first.
building on what has been said. So there may be, that particular, I don't know, families that actually may fit this kind of thing. But actually selecting also the right profile of that families that will benefit from it. I think there's such a thing called you need to concentrate also on some proposals are not for everybody, but the right group, right time, that proposal can work. So I would not say no to such a proposal, but I'll spend time thinking about the aspect. I will also spend time thinking about how long-term it's going to be and all that stuff, because I think currently a lot of models work on very short-term stuff. So there are also limitations. So longer term is useful. Then what is the outcome that we're looking for? Sometimes we're over-ambitious as well, right? Give you this money, but then, we expect you to really be able to fly, I don't know, or whatever. But maybe what is that moderate or reasonable outcome? I think sometimes we are too ambitious, right? Then I'll look at the third element, which is really about how the whole process is going to be curated. By process, I mean also relationships and all that. And it's okay with the curation if in the end the family say, along the way, I think I'll come to these 3 roadblocks, or something like that. But they don't want an expert, which is fine to me. But those roadblocks still need to be managed. Then if they say, no, I'll go and find my great-grandfather, I'll find my... Doesn't matter, but I think the thinking through of that process is important. So to me, the work needs to be in that space as we look at such a proposal. So in terms of who is the right profile that where this thing will work, what is long-term? Long-term is important because really a lot of these things is about investment. No? We really don't have appetite risk appetite very low especially Singaporeans. I think so. I don't know. Maybe talk about a longer term appetite. But generally, I find we are very short term. We don't have appetite for something, 20 years. I want to see it quite quickly. So to me, those things become important for me to reflect and think. And I think we do it well. It can work for that particular family or, 4 or 5 families.
Thank you for that. We'll open up for questions. You can submit through here. I'm still seeing the previous questions. If you could update this, no? Or anyone who wants to go to the mic. Fresh. Let's see how many questions there are. No, it's still the Baltimore. Maybe someone just asked Baltimore, so I thought it was. Okay, go ahead.
Hello. Actually, I just wanted to extend on Dr. Justin's idea on that on this whole idea of, maybe I was thinking of it more from a free market perspective. Like, say, instead of just putting money in your hands, why don't we do it like CDC voucher, right? To say, hey, I give you $25,000 of credits. You have to use it in social services, but you get to decide what social services you need. And to the idea that, okay, we actually need time for consultation, you can also pay for that consultation. You can say, out of the $25,000, I want to take $5,000 to hire a social worker to just figure out what I need. Yeah. And then you hire a GP and then, but basically it's still, basically sort of combining what that idea was with maybe what has been very good work done with like the CDC vouchers, right? Like you can only spend on food or you can only spend on what, So how about that as an idea? So to keep it within social services, but to still leave it to a free market solution. Yeah.
Thanks for that. I really kind of interesting because it combines 2 things. One is personal budgets, which is what UK and Australia does. If you're a person with disability, it's assessed that you need 20K a year, 30K a year. And then you choose, you're going to spend it on a very expensive social worker like Ruth, or Jingzhou is cheaper, right? Yeah, Jingzhou, our boy, can come to my house and chat with me and I'll spend it on him. Plus, it combines that with the community currencies, right? It's a currency that is only legitimate to be used within the nonprofit sector. And so then it creates and keeps wealth and assets circulating within the nonprofits. Any views?
I guess the question I would be very curious about is, would we co-produce this experiment with families? Because I know well-being intent, right? We feel this is a suggestion A, B, C, D, and then we try to, marry everybody, right? And then we realize that's a bet. Too many cooks spoil the broth. I'm just curious, what would families think? I mean, I would present this to families, and try to co-produce our intent. So if the intent is because you want to create spaces that you can enable them and help them to be more thriving families and hope that their communities become more vibrant and resilient, and that's the outcome that we want, then I'm be curious to, I think taking a curiosity positioning is important. What would families say to your suggestions, right? So if you say, oh, I think how about, maybe we'll convert them into credits. I mean, there are many great ideas, but ideas are only great if families feel this is really something they own. So I guess coming back to what would they think about this idea? Because, to one, it can be enabling, but to another, it could be demeaning, right? So I know families, example, who say, if you give me something, actually, it's actually not a very dignified action because the idea of asking me itself is actually questioning my deficit and my inability. So I'm not sure. So I feel that maybe, I think I like your idea that can be presented to families and communities about what they think about it. How would they take it and twist it and turn it? And what would they require? And I think that would be a really like a beautiful mess, right? I call it a beautiful chaos. And I think that is what I think community development work is about. It's really dynamic. It's different. As what Jing Zhou is saying, there is enough spaces for differentiations. So I think there are differentiated solutions. Some may work for some family, it may not work for some, and that's okay. But I just like that idea that, you would toy with that thought around it. So I thought that is a starting point here.
He wants a rejoinder before we go down the list.
I just want to give an example of this. And I'm not sure how many people know this, but we actually have credits if you're single to go dating, right? And I'm pretty sure a lot of Singaporeans don't use it, right? But you can technically, you have $100, you can go to a accredited dating agency, and then you can go on dates, go to JB, yeah. And I think that's a great example of something where it's really needs-based, right? Like what you said, go to the idea of will people like it or what do people think of it? And dating is a crazily taboo subject, but it's there lah, yeah.
Yeah, so it's almost like the next tempting idea is how about we convert all the unused CDC vouchers to pay it forward to families' bills, right? So that's also another possibility, right?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, just as we're riding on this wind.
Kai's waiting. Kai's going to announce a new voucher scheme.
No. I thought you have a very, very interesting idea. And I will take this back and share it with my MOF colleagues in this area. But I do want to resonate with what Ruth has said, because we also see that, if you give them the credits and you leave it on their own, I'm not sure whether families will want to just go and approach any of the social service agencies and go and get the service, or they will just file and forget. Just, okay, it's there. So I don't feel I need it, so therefore I don't need it. It's very transactional as well on one hand, which is what I feel may not be so doable. But on the other hand, it's a very, very attractive value proposition that you have given. So I am of two minds, really. I just want to also circle back to something that Jing Zhi has mentioned on professionals. Because I recall somebody actually told me, they would love to have professionals who are part of the community. And I think the key thing is, how do we welcome them? How do we embrace them so that they form part of the community? And I was earlier talking about community of partners, right? So professionals actually are part of that community of partners that we build together to strengthen our resilience, which is what Mr. Fong said earlier on in his opening, on how we can build resilient community. So I think one of the things that we can do is we need to embrace everyone. Everyone who is in the community should be embraced and should be part of the community if you're interested to do that. Thank you.
Well, I guess an addition point to what you're sharing, which is of course interesting, is that that is not uncommon in some places who kind of practice participatory budgeting, right? Whether is it on national budgets or even locality budgets, which decide what kind of health services they need, what kind of social services, which is the best provider, and different providers providing kind of different models that then communities come together to decide what is best for them. And that is also an interesting probably part to think about how we do evaluation today. I think the tension that we have in community development work also is that how do you evaluate the impact and the outcomes, and how do you quantify what that relational work is, which is incredibly challenging and contested. So if you actually kind of combine that and bring that back and say, rather than spend so much having to evaluate, get professional evaluators, then no one wants to do your survey and interview and focus group, having some components of community coming together, which is in an act of itself community development, to then decide whether that provider is actually upholding what the community and the funders are expect the service providers to do, could be a different way of doing evaluation, different way of guiding how that program or that service or that organization does their budgeting. And that could also then influence as to how much of it goes into, say, direct aid budgeting versus services and programs. Right?
I think that is a very complex thing for communities to understand. Social credits. Even if you give me like 25,000 points and ask me to use it, as someone who is educated, I'll be like, what? How should I use? What is there available to use? So who is going to do the work of communicating this scheme to the community in their language, in the way that they understand? Means that you actually also have to explain to them what are the services available, how are you going to use it, who is going to accompany them to use it. We keep saying, I think one of the things that we always miss, there's a big gap in the community work, right, and also in social work, is a befriender. Who is going to explain this thing to the community? How to use it? How to actually use this thing? That will be a work that is always missing. Yeah.
I was curious, actually, if we did an easier task, if let's say we created social credits, but for use amongst professionals who work in nonprofits, right? So that we don't have to pay expensive experts and evaluators tons of consultancy money, but Ruth can find a friend in a different FSC who has done evaluation, and then you pay for that with the social credits, and you keep the money within this economy rather than leaks into the private sector, absorbing them, right? Never mind. We'll leave Billion to, it's like a different conversation.
Doable. I always say things are doable. The devil is always in the details and working out, which is Sween's point. The work still needs to be done. So I'm for all these ideas. But heavy lifting, the work, hitting the ground, needs to be done. That's why all of us are in this room. And many of you have been doing heavy lifting. Today is probably your day of reprieve. Right? Because after today, 5 o'clock, you're back again to the ground. And we really need the heavy lifters, the work that needs to be done. So kudos to all of you. The work needs to be done. It's really in depth, because when you put your heart and soul into it, you really do those steps and you sow it. Ideas are doable, because you just need to satisfy people. Okay, there'll be the governance people say, okay, how do you set a structure? So you need to set up a structure and stuff like that. I want to also make a point which I learned from actually, again, solve n+1. I always have to pause. It's like, I'm very bad at math solve formula. But
I call them solvent. They'd be very angry.
Is
solvent.
Don't teach me bad things, correct things. Solve right. Yeah, then he was sharing with me this thing, and I think to me there is conceptually a bit of difference. He says they produce manual. So I say, hey, manual, is it like SOP? Because we're more familiar with terms like SOP. To me, there is a bit of difference, because SOP is more like step, right? 3.2, 3.5 and all that. To me, a manual is a bit different, because, and indeed, when he designed that group, the manual creates some white space that allows you some mobility and flexibility. So probably they create the space and all that to do the next step and all that, but it's not hammered down to 3.1, 3.2. So I quite like that idea. So if I'm going to curate something like that, I'll make sure that it's a bit like a manual, not so SOP, and stuck in it. So all these ideas doable, no? Just do heavy lifting work. And to me, there are so many needs. We really need to recruit more and more heavy lifters, people who will do the work, and celebrate. I want to make one more point. This morning I did hear a bit of things, then I felt a little bit sad. Then when I hear Jing Zhou saying all that compressed stress on him, I really want to celebrate. And we need to celebrate and build celebrations along the way. We really have come a long way. You ask Carol, we have come a long way, I don't know. But I think people like Gerard and I will say that it's a day of celebrations. We have come a long way. And you need to build those celebrations because our brain needs to be, whatever like in the front, the emo part, needs to be celebrated because it's heavy work. Can you imagine this come to this IPS conference, then they go back all much more depressed because so much more work needs to be done, and they're all very depressed. So day of celebration, because if you look around, we are not talkers anymore. No, the people in this room are all heavy lifters, and I think you all deserve a very loud applause.
With that, that's such a nice way to end, right? But then I'm still I actually do want people to have the closing reflections, and we'll end with you again. You already did your wonderful ending. How can you top that? But you're going to have to end again. So we want to go around to have closing reflections on your assessment of the state of community development in Singapore. What more is there to do here, and who can do what? Ruth?
I guess based on what I heard this morning, I think I'm very heartened first that I think we are in a nice space where cooperatives, philanthropists, the ministries, the communities, the social service agencies, and private sectors are now somewhat converging to a common space. So I think there's opportunities. If you probably do it like 10 years ago, not everybody seems to be ready, right? So I thought it's a nice space that people are converging. And I guess the question is, how do you want to maximize and leverage on all these assets? Because a community is made up of residents, associations, or the institutions, and there's spaces for everybody. So I think for me would be how that actually how does magic happen together? I think that's the question. I think the next point I want to say is I think community development is really in a simple way, right? I think simple is beautiful, right? It's really about the greatest number of contribution and participation, right? By the greatest number of people. So I think this is a closing reflection for me because there's so much said, right? And really it's how much do you show up? How much do people show up? And you will remember those contributions and participation. So you just think about your own life and who are people in your life who have contributed to where you are today. And if you join the dots, I'm sure it links to a myriad, right? So I think that's what community building is about. If you ask me what my hopes are and vision is really, I think, moving away from just economic reference, I hope our communities can work towards more of a give economy. And a give economy is in order to tackle like complex situation and where Jing Zhou's talking about just so many things to carry, right? I don't think you can do this alone. And poor thing for our young people, right? That I don't think they should be left to fend. They will need all the combined resources and strength of the economy that acknowledges now the talents of people, what they're passionate about, their interests. I see many young people very interested in different groups, and I think that's powerful. There's crowdfunding, there's all these resources. So we need to embrace capacities and interests, and really how we want to co-create and co-produce that change, right? And at the end of the day, it's really to support all the functions of communities, right? We all want to be healthy. We want to raise our children well. We want to make sure the next generation is not left with a whole bucket of problems, and really how we want to curate the knowledge and wisdom. So I think today, my closing reflection is, first, when we acknowledge that we don't know enough, and the humility of unlearning and reconstructing itself is wisdom. So I think that reflection for me is a good starting point for everyone, because then the real work begins, right? Of actually coming together, and collaboration is really about sharpening each other, but for really a common goal. So I think my simple call to action for all of you here, okay, it's a very simple action, okay? It's not a grand experiment. First is show up in your communities as neighbors and a resident to each other. So I challenged myself first years ago and say, I do community work. How do I show up in my community? Do we walk past people at our lift and pretend we don't say hi to people, but we show up in other people's community and say we are the best, you know? So I think first, do you say hi to your neighbors? Do you look out for someone else? So I think that's the first call to action. So as a resident, then second, as neighbors who care about each other, and what matters in your own communities that you want to take action about. So it's your own backyard. And then only we are professionals next, right? So I guess the rest is the wisdom, collective wisdom here. So that's my closing. Thank you.
Thanks, Ruth. No pressure for the rest, but you are holding up tea break. I can see my events team being very edgy, but no. But these people don't care about food. They care about intellectual nourishment. So take as much time as you like.
Is that true? It's between us and the tea break, right? Yeah, I just want to have a quick reflection on to share with you. I spent the whole day here. I actually cleared all my meetings. I really enjoyed listening to all the talks and all the discussion and all the key points that I've heard. I know I learned a lot today. Actually, thank you very much, Justin, for inviting me to be part of this process. I think I have a few things that I hope, and I think this is something that I've been talking to Talkboard about for many years. It's about long-term funding for complex problems. I think that's something that ever since I embark on this journey, many of the SSAs and organizations have been telling me that, you know, they would like to help and do something for the beneficiaries. But very often their how do you call it? Their funding is limited because it's only for 3 to 5 years. But we know that certain kind of work that we do requires a bit more time, a bit more years. And I'm just wondering how we can go about doing it. That's number one. Number two is really, if you look at my slides, I talk about collective impact and I talk about collaborative leadership. I'm happy to discuss with anybody afterwards. You have my email. Really, I think I wanted to share these two frameworks that could possibly help you, I think, in terms of bringing multiple stakeholders together in different sectors, really in trying to solve perhaps some complicated collaboration. I think that's one of the things. And of course, the collaborative leadership culture that you can think about, and it's written in the slides. Take a look at that. Perhaps that will be useful for you when you consider you want to help your beneficiaries or your clients in terms of complex issues or even environmental issues, climate change, mental health. I think that's the second point. And I think the third point is I really, really echo what I think Leonard was talking about it this morning, about having common language for community development. I think that's very, very important in Singapore, especially for us because I think we are quite a lot of us here are community development practitioners, although you may not know it, but you're probably it. I think it's important for us to have certain kind of same kind of common language. And when we talk about it, we know what we're talking about. And actually today, when I attend this function, this event, I came to realize that actually we do have some common language available. So that's quite good. And I hope that we can continue on solving complex problems and finding new ways to do that. So that is what I hope we can do in the future. Thank you.
Yeah, I thought I'll end with my gratitude for this panel for affirming, I think, the importance of what we see as relationships of community, time and presence to each other. And I think the ask that comes with that also, not just to funders, but I think as a general support, is that sometimes these things are not very new things, not very new concepts. They're not super innovative, nothing much probably to sell on the social innovation front. And perhaps also not for scaling, right? So Shin has a lot of questions when it gets a lot of questions about scaling. So, but it's good enough. It's good enough for the community, it's good enough for the people doing the work, and it meets the needs, like what Billion says, right? So what can we do to sustain these things that are not new, not exciting, not innovative, nothing much to really sell, nothing much to really scale, just wants to remain like that, good enough? What can we do together for these efforts? I think is important, because that also links to my point on the diversity of practices, right? You have some that are like that, and you have some that are otherwise not like that. Experiments, pilots, new models of doing things, and we need to have both. And I also thank my fellow panelists for caring about a young adult's individual pressures, but also certainly to go back to say that these are not just my own and an individual pressure. I think I share that coming from a place of what many of my peers and friends and other young adults and young members in the community also feel. And with that, it's also not just about taking care of individuals. And I think sometimes it's also because we really want to take care of all of these things. We do care about these things. So how can we perhaps imagine, support each other, and of a different kind of way of imagining life in our local communities and society that allows us to kind of embrace that, right? Care for each other, community. We all want that. What can we do more towards that? Not just on an individual level, but the structures or even cultural work that Shuin is talking about that can support it.
I'll do a very short closing, sorry. As someone who makes myself 5 days available on the ground, I would say that there's really a lot of work needed on the ground, and we don't have enough people. There are lots of the diversity of needs and problems and issues is so much. I get surprised or shocked every day. We really need people on the ground to do the work, to journey with the community. But I'm also always slapped in the face when I see funding requirement like you can't pay for manpower. So just this is my very real struggle. In the last 3 years, my work is to have more workers on the ground. But I'm often taught that, or told that, oh no, funding only go for programs. You can only hire an external vendor. So a person who is on the ground with the community, co-creating community life and spaces with the people are not paid. But I can hire a vendor to come in, and the vendor is paid. I think we really need to rethink about this. There's really not enough people on the ground with the community. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Swin. So let's continue to do this. Collaborate and then compete less. Communicate, criticize less. Cooperate, and then withhold less. Because I think once we do that, we really are better off. And then aim for empowered relationships, which all of you are doing, so that we minimize the transactional relationships. I think it's all about keeping that balance. And then let's have opportunities to practice to build resilience. Really, resilience comes from practice. Just have to keep practicing, and then we make sure that we create those opportunities for all of us to do that. Thank you.
A round of applause for all our panelists. Thank you so much.